Hey guys, what's up? Welcome back here to today's episode of Intuitive Angling. And man, I appreciate you guys swinging by the channel to hang out with me a little bit. And got some more story time today. I'm going to talk about the greatest angler in the world, probably, or one of the greatest anglers in the world that you've never heard of. Greatest bass anglers. This is a dude that I knew back in the early 80s. Going to tell you the story about him and why he is one of the top 2 or 3 greatest anglers ever that I've ever met. That you've never heard of. And a lot of them are, guys. Just because somebody is well known in tournament fishing, like these superstars you hear about in bass fishing, that doesn't mean they're the best anglers out there. A lot of the best anglers in the world have never fished a tournament before. They don't want to fish tournaments, and the people that you see fish tournaments are the ones that just position themselves to fish tournaments, and they gain that notoriety through tournaments. But that doesn't mean they're the best in the world, and I'm going to explain that in today's episode here. Also, guys, before we get started, a quick reminder, Tackle Warehouse has got they started a big 12 days of Christmas sale. Bunch of good sales on the whole website right now. I'll have my Tackle Warehouse link in the description of this video. If you guys would use that link in my description, that's my link to Tackle Warehouse. A great way to support intuitive angling. If you want to give something back to the channel, by using that link, we get a small percentage of a commission on anything you buy there. So that's much appreciated. And also, guys, I'd like to invite you to please swing by, check out my Fish of the Moment lake map breakdowns. We got our winter maps up on the site right now. I'll have the Fish of the Moment lake map breakdown link in my video description here too, if you guys would like to check them out. So appreciate all the support for the channel there. Really big thank you from me and my family there. Okay, guys, I'm gonna tell you a little story about this guy you've never heard of before. Back when I first started fishing, seriously, back in the late 1970s, I joined a bass club there in Joplin, Missouri called Big Mo Bass Club. And Big Mo there was a lot of really good anglers there. In fact, a lot of you guys know James Watson. His dad, Bill, was in my club. We had a lot of hammers in the club back there that were just, they were top level anglers for the time. And I learned a tremendous amount fishing with those guys in the club for a couple of years. But anyway, there was one guy, his name was Jess Po Dexter, and he wasn't in the club, but everybody knew Jess. It's like he lived there in Joplin, Missouri. He didn't, he wasn't in any bass club or anything, but Jess was legendary for catching big bass. I mean, he was like, he'd go down every week. He worked a full-time job, but he'd go down to the Table Rock Lake or Bull Shoals or wherever on the weekend, and he'd catch giants every single time he went out. I mean, every time he went out, he'd catch giants. Pictures of them. And then back then they had this deal where, they had like a weekly contest at some of the boat docks on Table Rock Lake where it was called the weekly lunker contest, and they paid $75 for the biggest bass of the week, and Jess would win it almost every single week. He was legendary. I mean, he was almost like this mythical character about how big a fish he caught all the time. But the thing about Jess is he was tight-lipped. It's like he would not tell anybody what he's doing. I mean, he was the tightest-lipped dude in the world. And anyway, at the time, I was like this gung-ho. I was probably 18 or 19 years old, and I was obsessed with Jess Po Dexter and his skills at catching bass. But the thing about it is I couldn't talk to him. It's like he was such a reclusive figure. He didn't want to talk to anybody. He was like this, I don't know, he's like some hermit, this mythological hermit creature. But I had a buddy of mine that knew him pretty well. His dad knew him, and they were family friends, and he was telling me about how secretive Jess was, and he wouldn't talk to anybody. So anyway, I finally had a chance to meet Jess and talk to him, and I just wanted to ask him fishing questions, and he wouldn't tell me anything. And at the time, Jess was probably in his 40s, I guess, and I was like, just a teenager. Wouldn't tell me anything. So eventually, my buddy, one of my best friends, David Bailey, still lives there in Joplin, Missouri. He got a chance to go fishing with Jess, and he was going to learn from Jess. So anyway, David went fishing with Jess, and they caught some big ones the day they went out, as usual. So I got a chance to find out from David about exactly what was going on here. So anyway, this is one of the stories about how he was catching them. He caught them in a lot of different ways, but this is one particular, way that he caught the fish. Back in the late 70s and early 80s, this was before traditional jerkbait fishing as we know today. And back then, we used this bait called the Rebel Spoonbill Minnow. A lot of you guys know what it is. It's sort of a striper bait. It's a minnow bait, but it's got a really deep lip on it. Floats up like a cork. It floats up super high. So anyway, David said that Jess, had a box full of these Spoonbill Rebels that he'd modified. He taken and he put like lead solder around the hooks on some of them, and some of them he drilled out and put lead inside of them, and then epoxied the belly of the bait. Excuse me, and to make them suspended, because those Rebels would float up real fast. So he weighted them down where they'd suspend perfect. And back then at Table Rock Lake, Table Rock was full of these submerged cedar trees, these big giant cedar trees, like bigger than your truck. Most of them would be grown in anywhere between 15 to 30 foot of water. Some of them would be 10 foot out of the water. Some of them would be at the water's level. Some of them would be just barely under the water, depending upon the water level. And the big technique back then that people didn't know about, but Jess figured out Jess figured it out before anyone else, is that these big bass would suspend around these cedar trees all year long. This was like a situational thing, and that Jess figured out that these fish were suspended around these big cedar trees all over the lake, and there were certain trees that he figured out that hold the big fish. And a lot of those trees, depending on how they were positioned in relationship to the deeper water and bank angle and that type of stuff. But anyway, he narrowed down where these trees were, and he figured out, excuse me, got a little sinus here, figured out the best trees were the ones that were just barely underneath the water that people couldn't see in about 25 or 30 foot of water. So David said that the way Jess found these trees was he'd idle down the bank, out off the bank, and he'd look down in the water until he'd find these trees, and then he'd triangulate them on the bank, and he'd move back off with that Spoonbill Rebel, and he'd throw that Spoonbill Rebel down the side of that cedar tree, get it down probably 8 or 9 foot, and he would let it sit there for 2 minutes, guys. Like anywhere between a minute to 2 minutes, maybe sometimes longer. He'd cast it out there, and he'd just hold his rod like this. He'd reel that Rebel down to where it got next to that tree where he thought it was close to it, and he'd just hold it, not do anything with it. And of course, the only movement that the Rebels have is maybe the water's, undulating a little bit. Maybe that Rebel's moving down there a little bit. But he said sometimes after a minute or two, all of a sudden Jess would be sitting there and your line would just tick like that. And he'd set the hook and it'd be a giant. It'd be a 7 to 10 pounder. So the patience that it took Jess Po Dexter to figure this technique out, as far as letting that bait to sit there for a minute or two, that was so far ahead of the time that it's just like it was genius for the time. And he did the same thing with different techniques. I remember, he was a master spinnerbait fisherman down at Grand Lake. Same type of deal. He'd catch giants down there, but he wouldn't tell anybody about it. But guys like Jess Po Dexter, some of the most skilled bass anglers in the world that just had an instinctual, intuitive knowledge of fishing, you've just never heard who they are because they choose not to fish tournaments, and they're very tight-lipped and they're very secretive. So one of the things, I guess the point of this video is, don't get overly impressed with the well-known bass anglers out there, because they're not necessarily the best bass anglers. They're considered the best bass anglers because they've been put into sort of a public eye that people make that assumption that they are. But there is a lot of Jess Po Dexters out there. Every lake in this country pretty much has a Jess Po Dexter. Maybe not to the level Jess was, but I've seen it in my own fishing. I've seen a lot of different places across the country where you got these guys that are they have something to them. It's an undefinable quality about their ability to locate and find fish. And I've seen the same thing with some of my buddies that hunt. Some of them just have an instinctual knowledge of hunting. They don't need all those bullshit trail cams and everything. They know how to track, and they know how to stalk, and their skills of nature observation is just off the chart. It's the same with guys like Jess. I mean, Jess probably he made it look easy about what he did, but there was probably a method to that goes beyond most people's comprehension as far as to locate and find fish. So anyway, guys, thought you just enjoy that story. Jess Po Dexter, man, one of the legends around my part of the country for the people that knew him. And just hope you enjoyed it. We'll check in later.